President Trump also announced a new trade deal with the UK. All that Britain demands in return is that we keep these two.
No! It must have felt like deja vu. Another night, another headline. But this time, the punchline didn't come from a tabloid or an anonymous Twitter account. It came from live television. Saturday Night Live, no less. Prince Harry had probably heard every joke imaginable about his wife. But hearing Colin Jost smirk into the camera and crack that line, apparently one of the terms in Trump's new UK trade deal is that we send Meghan Markle back, but only if she deletes her entire Instagram again, had to sting in a way no cheap tabloid ever could, because this wasn't just a late-night jab. It was the world saying out loud what many had whispered for years, that Meghan Markle's past is a suitcase she can't stop dragging behind her, no matter how far she runs. And in that moment, as laughter erupted across millions of living rooms, Harry probably felt the ground shift under his feet. You can picture him, sitting there in Montecito, jaw clenched, watching the same old cycle play out. A wave of gossip, a surge of outrage, and the inevitable flood of speculation about whether Meghan was ever who she claimed to be. The smirks, the memes, the snide commentary about her motives. He's seen it all before, and he's defended her through every single scandal. But this time it was different. This time it wasn't the tabloids or the royal family stirring the pot. It was the culture itself. The late-night shows, the internet sleuths, the regular people who once cheered them on now wondering if the fairy tale had always been a little too convenient. And it all started with a picture, or rather, a handful of grainy snapshots that refused to disappear. There she was, lounging on a yacht, a glass of champagne in her hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, surrounded by a crowd of wealthy men and socialites. No scandalous behavior, no crime in sight. But the context was damning enough. Because in an age where perception is everything, one image can burn through years of careful branding in a heartbeat. And as the photos resurfaced, people started asking the questions Meghan had spent a decade trying to bury. How did she get there? Who invited her? What was she really chasing before she became a duchess? But that wasn't the whole story. Photos were just the spark. What came next was the explosion. Reddit threads sprang up overnight, dissecting every pixel of every image. Twitter sleuths pieced together timelines, comparing timestamps and guest lists. Instagram detectives dug up old tags and deleted posts. One after another, claims and counterclaims flooded the internet. Some insisted the photos were innocent relics of her early acting days. Others claimed they were proof of a calculated climb up the social ladder, a strategy so meticulous it bordered on Machiavellian. And while Meghan stayed silent, the theories only multiplied. 'Cause when you refuse to answer questions, people assume you have something to hide. And Harry? He was left to watch it all unfold, powerless to stop the feeding frenzy. For years, he'd been the protector, the shield between Meghan and the world's relentless scrutiny. He'd taken on the press, the palace, the public. But this time, it wasn't just the usual suspects piling on. It was everyone. Late-night comedians, gossip columnists, podcast hosts, even former fans. The narrative had shifted. The underdog story was over. And in its place was a new tale. One of carefully managed images, disappearing friendships, and a digital past that refused to stay buried. But let's rewind a little, because this didn't happen overnight. The seeds were planted long before the wedding, long before the interviews, long before the exit. Started with access to the circles that most people only read about. The yacht parties, the elite fundraisers, the exclusive dinners where power brokers traded secrets over caviar. Meghan didn't stumble into those rooms by accident. She mapped the terrain. She networked. She leveraged every introduction, every connection, every opportunity. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Plenty of ambitious people do the same. But when you build a brand on authenticity and transparency, the appearance of calculated social climbing becomes poison. And that poison seeps into everything. So when the yacht photos popped back up, they weren't just old memories. They were a reminder of how easily a narrative can be rewritten. In one version, Meghan was a struggling actress hustling for her big break. In another, she was a strategist, assembling a carefully curated path to royalty. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. But on the internet, nuance doesn't sell. Certainty does. And the certainty spreading through comment sections and group chats was that Meghan had been playing a long game all along. Didn't help that so many of the people who once championed her had gone silent. Stylists who used to tag her in every photo, fellow actors who once gushed about her in interviews, socialites who partied with her on the French Riviera. One by one, their voices disappeared. Some accounts were deactivated, others were scrubbed clean. A few photos survived in old backups and caches, but the people in them? They vanished into the digital ether. And in that vacuum of silence, the rumors thrived. Because when the only thing left behind is a trail of deleted memories, people start to assume the worst. The NDAs were another layer. Whispers about non-disclosure agreements signed in exchange for silence. Allegations of hush money and threats of legal action. None of it proven, all of it plausible enough to keep the story alive. And while Meghan's team focused on positive press, lifestyle launches, heartfelt interviews, Netflix specials, the internet kept circling back to the same question. Why won't she just explain the photos? Why is she erasing her past instead of owning it? And if you think Harry was immune to the fallout, think again. Every time Meghan's credibility took a hit, so did his. Because their story was intertwined. The love story that had captured the world's imagination was suddenly being recast as a transaction, a calculated union built on ambition instead of romance. Every joke on SNL, every viral TikTok, every scathing headline chipped away at the foundation they'd built. And for Harry, who'd sacrificed so much to protect her, the betrayal must have felt personal. He'd cut ties with his family, forfeited titles, walked away from a life of privilege. And now, as the world laughed at their expense, he had to wonder if it was all worth it. But the internet isn't content with just one scandal. Once the yacht photos had been dissected, the amateur investigators turned their attention to everything else. The missing posts, the deleted blogs, the archived interviews that no longer matched the official narrative. Screenshots emerged, timestamps compared, metadata analyzed. And each time a new piece of evidence surfaced, it painted a slightly darker picture. Not a smoking gun, but a pattern. Pattern of erasure, deflection, and reinvention. Kind of pattern that feels less like damage control and more like a long-running strategy. Even the mainstream press began to take notice. Articles with headlines like "Unanswered Questions" and "Mysterious Deletions" began appearing in outlets that once treated Meghan with kid gloves. The skepticism was spreading beyond the usual gossip blogs. Even some of her most loyal defenders began to hedge their praise, quietly acknowledging that the silence was starting to look less like dignity and more like evasion. And all the while, Harry watched. He watched as the woman he loved was transformed from a symbol of change into a cautionary tale. He watched as the public sympathy that once buoyed them through every crisis began to evaporate. He watched as the narrative slipped further and further from their control. And he probably asked himself the same question everyone else was thinking. If this part of the story was true, what else might be? But that wasn't the end. Because just when the noise seemed ready to die down, another wave hit. Former friends and acquaintances started talking, off the record of course, whispers about carefully staged introductions to wealthy benefactors, hints that certain relationships were more transactional than anyone realized. Stories of lavish gifts, discreet arrangements, and a relentless focus on building a public image that could one day attract someone like Harry. Again, none of it definitively proven. But in the court of public opinion, proof is optional. Suspicion is more than enough. And that suspicion started to metastasize, spread from Meghan to Harry, from their marriage to their entire brand. Podcasts dedicated episodes to dissecting every detail. YouTubers built careers on analyzing every frame of every leaked clip. Comment sections became battlegrounds, with one side screaming about unfair treatment and misogyny, and the other insisting that no amount of sexism excuses what looked like a carefully orchestrated climb to the top. Meanwhile, Meghan's public response was nothing. No statement, no denial, not even a cryptic post about misinformation. Just silence. And in an era where silence feels like an admission, that decision was as loud as any confession. The woman who once sued newspapers over headlines she didn't like now seemed content to let the internet write her story. And that story was getting uglier by the day. Harry's reaction, though private, was surely intense. This was the man who once called the press a toxic force that had destroyed his mother. Now he was watching that same force turn on his wife, and by extension on him. But unlike the palace, which had centuries of experience managing scandals, Harry and Meghan were on their own. No courtiers to draft statements, no royal protocols to fall back on, just two people in California, watching their carefully curated image unravel in real time. And maybe that's the most ironic part of all. For years, Meghan and Harry had insisted they wanted control over their own narrative. They left the royal family to escape the media machine. They built a brand on transparency, authenticity, and the promise that they would always tell their own story. But when the moment came to confront the rumors head-on, they chose silence. And in that silence, the world decided the story for them. It's not hard to see why this scandal has stuck. It's not about one photo. It's about what that photo represents. A crack in the carefully constructed image. The suggestion that behind the speeches about empowerment and kindness was a more calculated ambition. And once people start to believe that, it colors everything. Every charity appearance, every podcast, every interview becomes suspect. It all starts to look like a performance. Tragedy is that some of it probably is real. Causes they support, principles they champion, the love they have for each other. But in the age of digital receipts, good intentions aren't enough. You have to own your past. You have to confront the uncomfortable questions. And you have to do it before the internet decides the answers for you. And as Harry sits in that Montecito mansion, watching the waves crash against the shore, he has to know that the story isn't going away. That every day they stay silent, the narrative hardens. That every rumor they ignore becomes part of the official record. And that one day their children will read it all. The yacht photos, the NDAs, the allegations of manipulation, the suggestion that everything was a strategy. And they'll ask their parents the same question everyone is asking now. Why didn't you just tell the truth? But maybe that's the point. Maybe the truth isn't as simple as everyone wants it to be. Maybe it's a tangled mix of ambition, love, insecurity, and survival. Maybe Meghan was a woman who wanted more from life than obscurity, who reached for something bigger and paid the price. Maybe Harry was a man who wanted to protect her so badly he couldn't see the cracks forming around them. And maybe in the end, none of it matters. 'Cause once a narrative takes hold, it doesn't need to be true to be believed. It just needs to be repeated enough times. And that's what makes this moment so defining. This isn't just a scandal. It's a reckoning. Collision between the story they wanted to tell and the story the world is determined to believe. And in that collision, something has been lost. The hope, the idealism, the belief that they could escape the system by walking away. 'Cause the system isn't the palace. It isn't the tabloids. It's us. The millions of strangers who decide one click at a time who gets to be the hero and who gets to be the villain. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real tragedy. Not that Meghan had a past. Not that she tried to curate her image. But that in trying so hard to control the narrative, she lost control of it completely. And now, as the laughter fades and the headlines pile up, the question isn't whether she can erase the past. It's whether she can ever convince the world to see her any other way. And still, the world keeps watching. Even now, as the internet finds fresh scandals to devour, the Meghan yacht photos remain a touchstone, a symbol of how quickly fame can mutate into something unrecognizable. For Prince Harry, this must feel like standing in the eye of a storm that never moves on. Each time he thinks the clouds are finally breaking, another gust of gossip whips around, pulling him back into the vortex. He has spent years insisting that what the press does to his family is unforgivable. He has called the headlines intrusive, hateful, even life-threatening. And in some ways, he's right. The scrutiny is brutal, unrelenting, and often unfair. But that doesn't mean it's all fiction. Sometimes, as much as he hates to admit it, the noise isn't just noise. It's the echo of questions people have been too polite to ask. 'Cause if your public image is built on moral clarity, on the idea that you stand for truth and compassion, then anything less than total honesty feels like betrayal. The same public that once rallied behind Harry and Meghan, cheering when they spoke out against racism, clapping when they talked about mental health, is now the public that feels entitled to pull back the curtain. They're not content with a carefully edited Netflix documentary. They want the messy parts, the contradictions, the secrets. And the irony is that Meghan and Harry once promised to give them that. They said they'd be open, that their story would be different, that by stepping away from the palace machine, they'd finally be free to speak their truth without interference. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't stop when you want it to. Keeps going. grows roots and branches, gets tangled up in the things you'd rather forget. And once you open that door, you can't close it again without looking like you have something to hide. This is what makes the yacht photos so potent. It's not that Meghan did anything wrong, it's that she didn't explain. She didn't own it. And in that vacuum of silence, people felt permission to fill in the blanks. What started as a few grainy pictures became a sprawling theory of social climbing, hidden benefactors, and a grand strategy to marry into royalty. None of it proven, all of it believable enough to spread. And if you think this is just about Meghan, you're missing the bigger picture. This scandal has become a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of celebrity culture. Part where audiences build someone up, only to tear them down when they disappoint. Part where the same journalists who once fawned over a duchess now dissect her every move with surgical precision. Part where former fans compete to unearth the most damning piece of evidence, as if the prize is proving they were right to be skeptical all along. Harry sees this for what it is, a feeding frenzy, a cycle he's been trapped in since he was a child. The same cameras that stalked his mother are now aimed at his wife. The same headlines that once called Diana the people's princess turned on her when she stepped out of line. And maybe, late at night, Harry wonders if this was inevitable. If anyone who marries into the royal family is doomed to become public property, a character in someone else's story. And yet, some of the backlash isn't about royalty at all. It's about authenticity. Because even people who never cared about the Windsors feel uneasy when a celebrity preaches transparency but dodges the simplest questions. When the public face doesn't match the private reality, that disconnect breeds resentment, and resentment is the seed from which scandal grows. Didn't help that the couple's exit from royal life was wrapped in contradictions. They said they wanted privacy but signed deals with Spotify and Netflix worth tens of millions. They criticized the British tabloids but courted glossy American magazines. They denounced the royal hierarchy but kept using their titles. Each choice added another layer of tension, another reason for critics to roll their eyes when they insisted they were just trying to live a normal life. And that's why the yacht photos mattered more than they should have. They were the first crack in the dam, the first time people could point to something concrete and say, "See, this is the real story." Doesn't matter that the photos don't show anything scandalous. Doesn't matter that no one has produced evidence of wrongdoing. What matters is that they exist, that they raise questions, and that Meghan's refusal to answer those questions makes the story impossible to bury. Even now, you can find the images floating around every corner of the internet, blurry and overexposed, but powerful in their ambiguity. Some see a woman enjoying a rare moment of glamour. Others see a calculated move in a long campaign to climb the social ladder. Neither interpretation is fully right or wrong, but in the absence of clarity, people will always choose the version that feels most compelling. And the most compelling stories are rarely the fairest ones. Harry knows this. He's lived it. He's watched his mother's memory be rewritten over and over, from saint to sinner to saint again. He's seen how quickly public adoration curdles into disdain. And he's learned, perhaps too late, that you can't control a narrative forever. Sooner or later, the truth, or at least a version of it, finds its way to the surface. And when it does, you have two choices: confront it head-on or pretend it doesn't exist. Meghan has chosen the latter, and that choice has consequences. Every time she launches a new project, a podcast, a lifestyle brand, a children's book, the same questions resurface, the same screenshots reappear, the same speculation ignites. Even when the projects have nothing to do with her past, they become tainted by association. Because in the internet age, your reputation is a composite of every rumor that ever attached itself to your name. And no amount of positive press can scrub that away. And it's not just her. Harry is caught in the same trap. For all his anger at the media, he's still bound to its rhythms. Every time he makes a statement about protecting his family, someone replies with a screenshot of the yacht photos. Every time he insists that Meghan is the victim of a smear campaign, someone else points to the NDAs. Every time he tries to shift the conversation to mental health or social justice, it gets pulled back to the same old controversy. And the tragedy is, they're not entirely wrong. The scrutiny is vicious. Commentary is often cruel. But the couple's refusal to engage only makes things worse. When your entire brand is built on openness, your silence looks like a confession. Some PR experts have speculated that this is a deliberate strategy, that Meghan's team believes ignoring the rumors will make them go away. But the reality is that this isn't 2005. You can't starve a story by withholding oxygen. The internet is an ecosystem unto itself. Every deletion, every refusal to comment, every attempt to scrub a photo only convinces people they're onto something real. And that's how this one picture, one moment frozen in time, became a symbol of something much bigger. Cautionary tale about the limits of image control. A reminder that in the digital era, nothing ever really disappears. It's easy to forget how quickly things changed. Just a few years ago, Meghan was one of the most beloved figures in the world. A biracial woman marrying into the British royal family. A breath of fresh air in a tradition-bound institution. A symbol of modernity, diversity, and progress. For a while, it seemed like she and Harry could do no wrong. They were the golden couple, the embodiment of a new era. But fame is a fickle friend, demands constant upkeep, feeds on novelty, and the moment you slip, it turns on you. One misstep becomes a scandal. One rumor becomes the accepted narrative. One unanswered question becomes 1,000 more. And the internet never forgets. For Harry, this must feel like the ultimate betrayal. He walked away from his family to protect Meghan. He burned bridges he can never rebuild. He sacrificed a life of tradition, duty, and certainty, all because he believed that love was worth it, that the woman he married deserved a fresh start, free from the toxicity of the royal machine. But here he is, years later, trapped in the same cycle, watching his wife become the punchline of late-night jokes, watching their carefully crafted narrative fall apart, and knowing that no amount of statements or interviews can put it back together again. Because in the end, people don't want a perfect story. They want a true one. And that's what Meghan and Harry never quite understood. It's not that people can't forgive ambition, or complicated pasts, or even the occasional lapse in judgment. What they can't forgive is the sense that they've been lied to, that the person they admired was never quite who they claimed to be. And as long as Meghan refuses to explain, refuses to own the messiness, she will never escape it. So where does that leave them? Stuck, suspended between the story they want to tell and the story the world insists on believing. Caught in a loop of speculation, backlash, and silence. And the longer they wait to break the cycle, the harder it will be to reclaim any version of the truth. Because in the end, this isn't really about a yacht, or a photograph, or a smirk on Saturday Night Live. It's about credibility. It's about trust. And it's about the simple, inescapable fact that once people decide you're hiding something, it doesn't matter what you say next. They've already made up their minds. And that is the true cost of silence.